So, well, thanks a lot for inviting me, Anna. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that I have this opportunity to really share what I've been doing in the past 2 years, let's say. And of course, I'm not alone. I will also doing a bit of short intro about my sort of partner in crime before I dive into the content itself. And yes. So let me quickly introduce myself still. So I am a EU grant advisor currently working at the UMC Utrecht based in the Netherlands. My expertise lies in the supporting of large consortium grants, but on top of that, I'm quite a big fan of AI. So I have been leading the working group inside the research office for the digital innovation and AI. And I think all the content I would like to share today are actually generated from quite long-term and inspiring collaboration with Ryan and Ayla. So two of them are my colleagues. And yeah, to be honest, I cannot do this without them. So I also want to give them credit before I start presenting. Yeah. So I think I like to start by sort of walking down the memory lane because I still remember like late 2022, that was when ChatGPT came into the picture. And I remember like my wife one day told me that there's a very cool chatbot just came into the market, and apparently, well, there's a lot of news and hypes about it. And to be completely honest, I laughed at it at the very beginning. I thought that's just something like gimmick, so it's just another smart chatbot that will soon disappear. But I have to admit that once I use it, I think my impression started to be different. And fast forward, I think 2 years later, so I think starting from 2023, there are more evidence showing that, okay, I think this is more than just a chatbot. So based on early study in 2023 and 24, it started to show that using this kind of sort of generative AI-based system can substantially increase the speed and quality of the knowledge worker when they work on their day-to-day tasks. So that's when the moment I started thinking about, maybe this is something different, and maybe we are at the beginning of something that's quite revolutionary. And if I look at how we work in the research management field, then this is actually the opportunity that we can probably disrupt it a little bit. And while the world was a little bit turning upside down, which was of course a bit exaggerated, but then if I look at my own organization, which is the UMC Utrecht, as a medical center, there was rarely any discussion, not even within my office. So I was a bit curious why that was the case, and I started to do a bit of poking. And when I was talking to colleagues, I started to realize actually a lot of people are or were interested in this kind of technology, but the sentiment seemed to vary. And another reason that people didn't talk about it is also because there wasn't any sort of official tool endorsed by our central IT department. Neither did we have a clear guideline from the central level. So then you can see that the sentiment varied because people have different experience, of course, and they also have different sort of concern over the use of this kind of new technology. And some are, of course, very enthusiastic about it, like myself, but some were quite skeptical, and some were sort of in the middle, but they were hesitant to try because they didn't know what's the consequence. And of course, what didn't really help is that as a medical center, since a lot of issues remain unresolved around the use of generative AI or any kind of tooling powered by the large language model, for instance, well, the communication from the central level is very restricted. So we didn't really have a lot of freedom to just easily purchase a license and spread it around in the entire organization. And all the message was a bit top down and sort of unilateral. So we didn't get the chance to discuss with the expert in the field, either with the technology or with the information security. And of course, they didn't want to risk anything, which I understand. So then all the information communicated was you shouldn't use it because it's quite risky. But after a while, I also found out that, yeah, it's not really the way it should have done. So we were hoping to have something more open and probably could have some kind of discussion amongst either the colleagues or with the expert from the security office, for instance. And that's where it got me thinking, what could we do? Because as research office, we are not directly involved into high-risk data in the sense that we don't process patient information. So in that sense, we do have a bit more freedom to explore. And that's when I got the support from my team leader saying that, yeah, let's try to do something differently while we wait for the central guideline. And that's where we came up with the first pilot, and I like to call it some fancy name, so I call it the future project, and especially a small scale pilot that involved only 11 colleagues from office, but we try to spread around the expertise. So it means that they have different functional role in the team. It's quite straightforward because then it's a pilot that we will give them the access to ChatGPT business workspace, and the duration was 9 months. So it wasn't too long. And basically we try to see, okay, if the team had this kind of access and the access toward this sort of cutting edge frontier technology, how would it look different? And what's the actual utility of using this kind of new technology within our work? And of course, we didn't just sort of go cowboy, so because we are still working in a sort of like restricted environment. So we, from the get-go, we try to, well, we actually deliberately reach out to information security officer and say that we are doing this pilot and we wanted to collaborate. So the entire process was designed to really trigger so-called bottom-up conversation exploration. So we didn't have sort of any agenda really in mind. We wanted to see what's possible and what could look differently if we do have this kind of initiative running in office. In order to do that, we deliberately design, we call it 3-pillar framework, but it's basically 3 individual components that we want to install within the pilot, namely the technology, training, and policy. I think technology is focusing heavily on identify the real use cases. So we want to see, with all the hype, what can we actually use it for? And the second pillar lies at the training, and which is also one of our biggest focus, that we want to use the education to build the AI competency and capacity within the team. And the third pillar lies at the policy, because we also see that from the central level, there was very little movement. So then we actually intend to use this kind of initiative to trigger something a bit bottom up. So we want to see if we try to make, or at least start to make some kind of policy, will that trigger sort of a ripple effect that they will also get moving because they see a lot of initiative popping up. And of course, alongside these 3 pillars, we also implement sort of different approach to facilitate the process. And this is the one that, of course, highlight on the right. So we have generative AI help desk, but to be completely honest, it's just me and Ryan. So we are like the help desk there. And we also had the prompt database so we can collect data. And we also try to already build some custom GPT so then people can easily use it to get a sense of what's possible. And of course, we also did the survey just regularly to monitor the progress so we can have something more concrete and more quantifiable. Then I want to start with pillar 1 and 2. So besides just giving them access, we thought, yeah, I think if we look back, then every tooling we ever introduced, it's some kind of a bit of bummer because then people don't really use it. So we can imagine that the access is not enough. So you need something to trigger them to be curious and to explore themselves. So then we planning 3 different workshops, and each one of them have a different focus. And the workshop or the entire training program is really designed to trigger so-called mindset shifting. So we realized that working with generative AI is very different from using typical, let's say, the Microsoft suite, like you have the Word, and you always have to click certain button that trigger certain responses. But using large language model is a very different experience, and we do want to also sort of convey that message through our entire educational program. And we really hope to trigger adaptive behavior, meaning that we want people to explore themselves at work. So it's not always we are dragging them along, but then they actually got curious and they could start to explore all by themselves. So the first workshops, of course, focusing heavily on setting the stage. And we particularly wanted people to understand what's behind this new technology, because there were a lot of misconception, I would say, and a lot of hype, of course, from the internet and from the news, but not all of them were true. And we wanted people to know, okay, actually, these are the real sort of principle behind it, and how can we spot pitfall, for instance, so we can use it responsibly. That's for the first workshop to set up stage, and hopefully that plant the seed for the colleagues to feel more comfortable to explore. And the second one, after 3 months, we had another session where it focused on shared knowledge, because people have experience already. We want them to openly share, and then we want them to really talk about it in a safe environment. And of course, we also use the chance to dive a bit deeper into different features for ChatGPT. And the interesting thing that I also want to highlight, that's we deliberately design different sort of scenarios. So we have different assignments for people to work on during the 2-hour workshop, I think. And then because they have different roles, so we assign different sort of tasks to them. And it's quite fun to really see that they sometimes struggle and sometimes they get weird answer, but that was also the response we intended to get, because with this kind of sort of faulty or silly answers, and it gets us the chance to really discuss what went wrong and how could we improve. So it's really highly interactive, and for me, it's also quite inspiring. And the last one is really to wrap up the entire pilot, where we want to do a little bit of reflection. So what did you found and what did you feel about it? And then part of it was dedicated to what could we improve and what was missing, and what do you see the potential of using these things, and what's the risk that you also see. And I do want to also mention that the entire sort of spirit or ideology that we want to build our training upon is that we don't want it to be solely focused on the productivity gain, because that's always not the best way to sort of prompt people to learn new things, because if they only think about work, the workshop sales becoming extra work for them to become better at their work. So we don't want to sort of trigger that kind of train of thought. So we deliberately designed it as like fun and really open, so you can ask any question, any doubt, you can share, and then we can just discuss. And then we also design quite fun assignment that they can play around with. And it worked out quite well, I would say. So it's better than I thought. And I put a small quote here, because after 3 trainings, I think one of our colleagues approached us, and she's not quite tech savvy. So she was also quite resistant when we started the whole things. And she really told us, yeah, this really, the workshop got me over the hurdle. So then after that, she started to use it more and more, which was exactly the behavioral change that we were hoping for. And that was the fun part, but of course, there's also a less fun part in my view. It is quite necessary so that we work closely with information security officer just to see what are the risks that could be involved. So we have this kind of periodic risk assessment, and based on that information, we could also design a better document or guiding document for the colleagues to follow. If they, for instance, like every 6 months you have to delete the data, which part of the data are restricted, you shouldn't put it in, which part are so fine, and things like that. And we also had the text ready so that we could also be transparent when we use this kind of the tool to help out with the researchers. And we always send them this communication text so that they know while we are supporting them, the AI was involved. The surprising things to me was that it's kind of a learning process, not just for me, it's also for our information security officer, because I think he told me after a few sessions, and he really told me that, yeah, I think this session is not just, it's really helping me to understand the implication of using this kind of technology. So then that's when I realized that even for them, I was expecting that they would be the expert to understand everything, but for them, it's new. And we often forget that the people sitting on the side who are kind of against what we want to do, it's their job, and it's also in their nature that they want to understand a bit more. So that actually comes back nicely to one of the points that we want to start the pilot, which is triggering dialogue and open conversation, and we did manage. Of course, we do want to see what's the actual impact of this pilot beyond all the training and nice words from our colleagues. And we look at 6 different categories. So each of them represent different aspects that we do want to understand what's the impact of this kind of pilot and what's the impact on adoption and literacy in general. Over the duration of 9 months, our survey did shows that the confidence level slowly rose. At the very beginning, I think we have colleagues who are somewhat unconfident about it. And in the middle of the pilot, that part is gone. The interesting is that at the closing survey, it popped back again. So we didn't know who is this colleague, so we approached him, and he told us that it's not because he didn't feel comfortable using ChatGPT, because I think along the way we also introduced different kind of tool like Notebook LM and all other things that me and Ryan encountered. And he told us that he felt a little bit uncomfortable because there were just so many going on, and then he couldn't keep up anymore. So he felt like he lost the confidence of using all kind of tool confidently, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, so I want to share it here. And in terms of AI literacy, it's also sort of steadily growing. And by the end of the pilot, I think the person who indicated is like poor literacy, the part is entirely gone. So at least I think, well, I believe all my sort of colleagues who are part of the pilot, they are somewhat having moderate level of knowledge to use the tool or to use ChatGPT comfortably and hopefully more responsibly. The frequency of use, not just ChatGPT, I think in general, because in the survey we asked about how often you use different kind of generative AI-based tool. And of course, I think almost 50% of them started to use daily by March 25th. But I have to caveat that by saying that because things has evolved also in general, so we actually couldn't tell whether this is solely due to our pilot or it was just because everybody started to use the tool more comfortably. So that's, we cannot do a control. We couldn't do a control group. So then this is the part where we couldn't really find out the answer. The use cases also sort of kind of exploded after a while, because then once they get into the flow, then they also feel more comfortable to explore a little bit better. And then we can see that different kind of use cases pop up, and it even increased, I think, around 60% based on the baseline. But what's more interesting to see is that a lot of colleagues they find different sort of use cases or application beyond just simple text editing. A lot of things that we didn't teach them in our workshop. So they really, I think the credit belongs to them. They really explore themselves. For instance, that my policy as a EU liaison officer, so she's heavily focusing on the policy side. So she used NopeLM to do policy analysis, and she was also using GPT-4 also, that was back in time, for impact analysis. And for the pre-awarding, so like myself and my colleagues, sometimes we use it to create like a kind of like mock project, but solely for inspiration before we go into a discussion with the researcher for a specific funding opportunity. And we also have the pre-award, the post-award, so that's my project management colleagues who are using it, for instance, in this case, because at the UMCU every, I think, 5-6 years, we do have this kind of self-evaluation report. It's complete public information, so it was actually also a safe space to experiment a little bit. So they built this custom GPT to combine input from multiple different stakeholders. And for the project support officer, they commonly use it to like book the venue, for instance. So they really use the deep search function, and they also use like Perplexity, things like that. And we have access to Microsoft Copilot at the basic level, so they also use it as an ICT help desk, which is also quite common in their work. And the last two things, one of which is the productivity. Of course, it's sort of self-reported, but you can see that people, at least they perceive that the use of generative AI started to have positive impact on their productivity. And the last things, it's about time saving. So, well, I would, of course, take this kind of survey with a grain of salt because it's always self-reported. It's based on personal feeling. And of course, the involvement of this kind of pilot also sort of have a little bit of, I think, subconscious effect on the people. So, but it's a good reference anyway. So I still wanted to present it here so that eventually, at least all the people who are in the pilot, they feel like on average every week it saves them around 2 hours roughly. So if you multiply by 11, then that's roughly around 22 hours, 24 hours per week. And here I do want to sort of leave a hanging question to all of you and also for myself, like, so what do we do with this extra time? At least for me personally, I can share that this kind of time saving allow me to keep doing what I love. So being an AI advocate and being able to train my colleagues. But yeah, so this is also something to maybe think about. And the other thing I do want to bring up is also like, I think the existing of generative AI or any tool like this is supposed to help us to become better human being, better having better work-life balance. So it shouldn't be used as a mean to cut cost or cut corner. Unfortunately, I do see that for in a certain area, it does have this kind of sort of negative effect. So it went into a different direction. But I do hope that with the more understanding and more adoption of this kind of tooling, then the thing can move toward a better direction. So for the last pillar is about policy. I would like to quickly touch upon it. So personally, I wasn't that much involved, but two of my colleagues were. And what we were thinking is that we want to trigger this sort of like bottom-up actions so that afterward, if we could build something as a basis, then we hope that the organization can pick it up. And then from there, from the central level, they could start to build out something that's more for the entire organization. It worked quite well, at least for the Utrecht University. So just for background information, so UMC Utrecht is the medical faculty of the university. And from there, first in the February 2024, so that's when we first started all this movement. We try to build the first guideline for the RMA, so the research support office. And from there, Ayla from the Utrecht University, she took it up and she brought it up inside a bigger discussion and broader discussion within the different faculty within the university. And then, well, it was quite a struggle, but then after a year, there's a sort of like the organizational level guideline published. On the other hand, we saw a very different sort of direction at the UMC Utrecht, because until now, we haven't had anything yet. So it's almost 3 years in, we haven't had any sort of policy on the official level. But at our organization, I think different departments are piloting different things. And also on the central level, we do have a pilot working with Microsoft. So it's kind of interesting because the Utrecht University, despite the fact that they have guideline, on the central level, they are quite restrictive in terms of which tool to use. On the other hand, we don't have a policy, but then the organization is actually quite eager to explore what's possible within a sandbox environment, of course. And along the way, we did see quite a few different kinds of challenges, so I also want to share it here. And the first thing is like it's very hard to balance the value and technology. And also, if you try to incorporate the interest from different stakeholders, it really takes time. So if you want to start, then you should have started yesterday, maybe, because then I think it's a matter of you need to get a lot of input from different stakeholders with different interests. And there were also very lengthy discussion on the wording. So that was the experience from ILA at the university. Eventually, they reached somehow to a consensus, but it took it like a year and almost a year and a half, and it's still, I don't think it's there yet. So it's a working document. And another thing that you could at least do with this, you could do different kind of training and presentations within the boundaries of your organization's own regulation. So you can increase awareness, and then that's also where you can meet your sort of friends and allies. So then you can form together a bigger forces to make change. The initiative usually quite fragmented, at least that's what we saw, which was kind of a pity because we thought we were the only person who was doing that. So we tried to pull every string ourselves. And then looking back, I would really recommend that if it's doable, then before you start working on something, try to map out what's happening in your own organization. Because it could be that there are already like 100 people writing guidelines. It's just that nobody knows each other who's writing that. So together, I think I mean, joint forces will make a bigger wave, if I can put it that way. And the technology has evolved so rapidly, and just really try to step up and work together. I think all the guidelines that were published, they should not be sort of carved in stone. Always leave a little bit of flexibility inside, and then understand or sort of keep in mind that it will be a living document, because what you wrote 6 months ago might be already outdated, like after 6 months. And you might be surprised how many people having the same sort of visions within your organization, and each one of them also have different expertise. So again, I think it comes back to finding your friends, for instance, and then finding the right people in your organization is so quite critical. We see that if you have the decision maker who's lining with you, then it makes it better for you to sort of promote the movement that you intend to do. And perhaps just to end my presentation in high notes, so I'm just happy to share that after the first stage of the pilot, we are now moving toward the next step. So for me, I see the first stage as building AI sort of literacy, so people understand what it is and they can use it comfortably. But what we will do and what we are already doing now is that we want to build AI fluency. So in the second stage, which we call LIFT project, we will heavily focus on deepening the knowledge, particularly the use of ChatGPT and different or more advanced functions. And of course, we also want people to get used to switching gears and using different tools within the boundary that's allowed. And the next step, in my view, would be to consolidate all the best practices, and hopefully that's in my plannings, that we will have some kind of AI playbook or some kind of SOP that we can really shape the research support process very differently. And I also see that these two projects will serve as a stepping stone when the organization is ready to really adopt, for instance, Copilot on an organizational level. Then all the knowledge that we now teach to our colleagues are all transferable. So they can easily switch to a different tool without problem. And of course, we will continue with the education so that we want to make the switch as smooth as possible. So maybe just one takeaway, I think. So I wrote a few things here, but that's more to recap the different pillars. But the only thing I do want to mention is that if you want to try this kind of approach, or if you ever want to introduce, let's say, the generative AI-based system in your organization or in your office, think about your people, because a lot of time it's more thinking about technology. So if we have this fancy toy, then everybody will play with it, or if we introduce this, then we can get rid of 10 FTE, for instance. But I don't think that should be the case. I think when you think about introducing this new technology into your workflow, you should think about how your colleagues can use it or can better use it, and how can you make it easy for them to adopt it, because not everybody are tech savvy and not everybody feel comfortable to learn a new thing that is so disruptive and is so different from they used to work. Yeah. So I think that's my one and only take-home message. Yeah. And yes, so thanks. I'll stop sharing now so I can see, well, the abbreviation of everybody.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the summary. Maybe we can, if there is specific questions basically coming up, we can always put up the presentation as well and so on. So I encourage everyone right now to put the question in the Q&A rather than in a chat. And also, if you have any links, announcements, anything to share, please put them in a chat rather than in Q&A. Thank you so much, Tse-Hsiang. I have already. I think at AIRON, I was attending your presentation as well with other colleagues from Utrecht as well.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, and I really appreciate how you developed different methods looking of the adoption, and in a very easy way also could explain the process and the outcomes. Okay, I have a couple of questions from me, but let us look first in a Q&A. There is one question from Daniel, and thank you, Daniel.
Yeah,
I just for posting it here. So Daniel is interested in a concrete exercises at the University of Utrecht, because we were talking about how the process itself works, about the employees' reaction, but maybe you can mention some concrete exercises, and that would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's I couldn't really put in all those because we do have like different assignments and work on the work documents, for instance, but then I couldn't really put it here. And I think one of the exercises I still remember is because we wanted to teach them how to use the custom instruction in your setting. So I think it's still called custom instruction, if I remember it correctly, but it was early day, of course. And then me and my Ryan, we already built a set of instruction, for instance, because we wanted to see let people to see how the instruction can steer the answer or how the system respond to it. So we saw a very interesting way online from one of the influencer on LinkedIn. And what he actually do is that he built the instruction in a way that there were 4 different characters, I think, and each one of them were designed to respond very differently. So I think one is more like the researchers, and the other one is like philosopher. The other one is more on maybe on the communicator. So we built that already for our colleagues, but then what we did is that we asked them to put that in, and then we asked them to sort of conjure different personality simply by mentioning, because each character we give them a name, and then we ask them to switch between different sort of name, and then to see how the system responded differently. So that's just because I think we thought it's better to do that, so then people could feel how the instruction actually work, compared to if we just show them a video saying that, hey, you can do this, looks fancy, and that's done. And we also had different exercises for Canvas. For instance, we asked everybody to write a short piece. I think, I remember. So I think it was a bit fun. So we asked them to ask the system to come up with a recipe for stamppot. So that's quite a typical Dutch cuisine. So that was a starting point. And then we asked them to activate the canvas to see how you can tweak the text yourself. And because also within the canvas, you can already ask, like, how can I improve the text? How can I make it easier to understand? So we asked them to move the level of difficulty or the level of reading toward like elementary school or kindergarten. And then they all laugh about it, because then you see all kind of metaphor, things like that. So that was just a few examples that I mentioned with the exercises. And of course, we also have a more extensive exercises that I also don't remember exactly in mind, because it was written in the document, one of which is like we wanted them to use the reasoning model. So then we actually try to ask them to throw different difficult questions that require a bit more reasoning in their work, and just to see how the system responded differently if we simply use the for all compared to all one. So that was back in time, of course, there wasn't any automatic routing. Yeah. Well, I mean, for Danielle, if you want to get a bit more, then you could definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to share the Word document that I created with you. That's not a problem. So you also get a bit of insight into what we do. I have to admit that wasn't something fancy. So we didn't ask them to do like the advanced mathematic analytics or write a paper in 10 minutes or something. So it was really designed to be also a little bit easygoing, because we didn't want the people who have never used the system to immediately fail. Oh, this is so difficult, and I didn't even understand. How could I steer the reasoning model, for instance, better with different kind of prompting technique? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a very quick question to you because you mentioned a couple of user cases, but there were possibly more. Which of them produce a significant difference? So the people said, oh, a lot of work that will consume a couple of hours has been done now by using generative AI.
Yeah. So this is also something that's quite interesting, because maybe I can start with myself. So I actually don't think the work become less, but I can tell that the quality becomes better. So in a sense that maybe I can do something relatively well, in the same amount of time, so that my output becomes better, and then that allow me to do 100 more things. Of course, that's that's always the danger, but part of which allow me to do a lot of training that I would like to do and also share my knowledge with the team. And I think that a lot of time saving actually came from my policy colleague, because she says that it used to take her hours to analyze all those different documents on the EU level and on the national level, just to come up with some kind of suggestion for the management level as well. And then she has to synthesize all these 10 different documents, each one of them may be up to like 50 pages easily. And with the Notebook LM combining with for all, then she could quickly synthesize the information. And one thing I do want to highlight is that because she's the expert in the field, so she know exactly whether if something is hallucinated, because she know where to check and she could follow up. And sometimes also their common sense, because they know something happening, but then if they want to quickly check down where are those information from, then NoPLM, she says that it's genius. She has never used that before. And also she was using it for making like a podcast style conversation. That's also the early day. And it created a lot of fun already. So then that's, yeah. And one of the recent cases was from one of my colleagues who's a program manager, and they host some kind of opening events, also about the evaluation of the organization. And she actually used the Noble LM to turn the entire report into a conversation. So it's based on the podcast function. And now everybody thought that she's like wizard. So nobody know exactly how she did it, but apparently it worked. Yeah.
Well, you can definitely, there is so many tools out there. There is a lot of opportunities to really impress people, impressive
Yeah.
presentation. I have a very quick question, because the observation was made by someone, I think was Jeff from University Irvine, University in California, in Irvine. And do you feel like because colleagues or teams are different career stages, some of people just maybe started, some have plenty of experience of using knowledge, professional knowledge, and using AI. Who is mostly to benefit from these tools? And I just want to mention very quickly the backstory. So Jeff was using AI in pre-award,
Yeah.
and a lot of younger colleagues seem to not be able to build up a knowledge as we do in a regular way, because AI was there and they could rely on it. And there were some sorts of errors. So there is some data now coming up, and with how to use AI, who is benefiting, where it's not beneficial, and what a career stage. But I wonder, what was your experience? What is your experience, and what would be your advice?
Yeah. That's actually a very hard question. It's a very interesting question because I saw similar trends happening. Well, I think we are in a previous situation in the sense that our team was has been quite stable. So we didn't have a lot of new colleagues joining, not so far, but we did have one uh, who joined recently. Yeah, and I think the thing is that I can tell from the learning process that there are signs of use of AI, but I mean, I encourage her to use it, so it's not like she was forbidden to use it. But then I can see the struggle, because then it means that if you have never been a grant advisor, for instance, then it's hard for you to judge, okay, whether the content generated by the AI is solid enough. And I would also say that it's sort of unavoidable, so it's kind of interesting. So now sort of onboarding process becomes not just about onboarding in terms of the pure knowledge or the process itself, it's also becoming how you could train your colleague in using AI in their work. So it become, yeah, so maybe the onboarding becomes more difficult these days because then you have to think about something more. But I do see that's coming, and I would expect that becomes harder and harder if the tool just become more capable and the new people who are sort of the first timer in the grant writing world, they don't know or they will have hard time to grasp what's a good writing, for instance. But to be completely honest, I also think we are worrying based on what we have learned and how we grown up. So will that still be a problem in 10 years if that just becomes so normal, like using a mobile phone or using Google? Yeah. So yeah, so I think that's a bit of sort of hanging problem, but hanging question, but I also don't have the answer. Yeah. And I would say that sometimes also my original expectation was that the newer colleague might sort of pick up the tool easier. But that's not always the case. I also find out that my colleague in the policy side, she's already working for quite some years. And she's actually one of the sort of the front runner once I introduced any tool. So she had a lot of fun. So that's also something I saw, which is quite intriguing. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question is, and it's based on my experience. If you build something just for yourself, to help you with your work, it's all fine. But if you think of building a tools for somebody else, for a group of people, you immediately come to conclusion the whole workflow doesn't really work as it's supposed to, as it was in the future.
Yeah.
It's like adding another entity to it. Then you start adding other people. Then comes the question, how to structure the knowledge, who's supposed to have a permission, etc. So, what was your experience with AI and redesigning existing workflows?
Yeah, I can be really honest. I don't think our office is there yet because, of course, I always want to build, for instance, like a GPT for all our researchers. I want to build a tool to write part of the proposal for the team, for instance. But then here comes the problem. We cannot put in any really sort of confidential information inside, not at all. So for the comprehensive writing, it becomes kind of useless. And for building a tool for the researcher, that's also something I would hesitate because I don't want one day the security officer come to me saying that, hey, because you build this tool, so now everybody's dumping their confidential research into the GPT. So that's where we kind of struggle because we just don't have a tool that's safe enough and allow us to really fully leverage what's possible. I have built sort of one or two GPT for other colleagues, but that doesn't, well, I don't think that's enough to trigger the entire sort of change in the workflow because it was for something more like a bit one-off for something smaller, which could take a lot of time from them. So then it's good to have something on the side. So it probably saves their half of the time. For instance, like we want to do like a mini series for to introduce our colleagues because we recently have the official linking profile for the entire team. And of course, if we do it like manually, then our the colleague who's responsible for it, she has to interview everybody and she has to rewrite everything. So I designed a bot that will interview the colleagues for her, and it will also produce the first draft based on her requirement. But I don't think that's enough to change or to revolutionize how we work at office. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the final question, as we are nearing the end of the event, is how do you see the future of AI? There is very, very exciting development coming up, with quantum computing and, etc. So how do you see the future of AI research management and the future for our profession?
Oh, that's yeah. Um, yeah, I think for me, well, I can speak for myself. I have the feeling that the grand writer will disappear to a certain degree. So actually, I don't think my job will look the same, maybe in 2 years' time even. But I do see that with all these advancements, the human components might become the most important. Yeah, although I think I have this wild imagination. The other day, I was chatting with others, and I say that, yeah, I think the dream of my day in the future is that every day I walk into the office, I have a cup of coffee, I tell the computer, hey, screen through all my emails, tell me what's important, what's not, arrange or reschedule non-necessary meetings, reply to those with like standard answer, and then I can go and chat with my colleagues and comes back in I don't know 30 minutes, and maybe I have a meeting with one of the researcher, and what we have to do is we only have to make decision based on all the information automatically generated by the artificial intelligence or whatever computing system. So we only have to see, okay, this approach makes sense and this doesn't. And then we try to see how we can compile different components together. And based on all the data, they will run simulation and all kind of crazy things in the background. And maybe after that, we come back and see, okay, will this proposal ever work? Or what's the probability that it will work? And we can shuffle around different kind of approach again, things like that. So we are kind of like the decision maker only, so we don't have to go into those sort of tedious work anymore. But it's more on a higher level, and of course, I think we will all love to keep the personal touch and all these discussions and feeling empathetic and things like that. But I think that's just me. I don't think that everybody want their calendar to be arranged by AI. Yeah.
Well, I think thank you so much for saying this, because I think very often we are with our heads down of creating efficiency, but yeah, like looking from the end, what do we want to achieve? What would be the best scenario? Where are we going to? And then kind of think, okay, where AI would be useful or not, rather than using ad hoc and thinking what the long-term outcome is going to be. So thank you so much for sharing this. Thank you as well for presenting here. I'm very, very excited. For what is going to happen next at Utrecht as well. So we hope we can stay in touch. Thank you everyone for attending the session. This is our final session in this year. If you want to catch up, there is go to our YouTube channel and you can listen to another recordings, and we will start with our new session in the new year. And with this, I wish everyone a happy and relaxing Christmas break and a great New Year's celebration. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.